back, 24 minutes before the hour on First Light, and we're talking about jobs this morning, and we have a unique perspective to bring to you. We were very surprised when this pandemic began that if we wanted to get a face mask, it had to come from China. Antibiotics and medicines coming from China, a lot of personal protective gear coming from China, leaving us vulnerable when we were first starting to deal with this. And, you know, the Chinese government has companies and has interest in companies, several thousand of them at least, that are in the United States. And we want to see what we need to do about that and look at the question that this pandemic may have brought to our attention, that we need to get made in the USA. We want to see that label on more products. So here's somebody who can talk to us about that. Greg Kozera is Director of Marketing for Shale Crescent USA. He's a professional engineer, the author of Just the Fracs, Ma'am, which that's a great title for a book. And I'd like to welcome Greg to First Light. Thanks for being with us, Greg.
Good to be with you, Michael.
All right, lay it out.
Since this whole pandemic, I don't think the American people realize just how dependent we are on China for PPE, ventilators. But what really hit me, and I'm in the business for economic development, is I didn't realize that 80% of our prescription drugs come from outside the U.S., and a lot of those come from China.
What is the extent of the problem, and how do we fix it?
You know, the United States today has a real advantage that most people hadn't even thought about. Is we have two things going for us. One, because of the shale revolution, we've got abundant economical natural gas. And that's not just a fuel, that's the feedstock for plastics and petrochemicals. But the other thing that we have is advanced manufacturing. We are on a par with China and the rest of the world when it comes to labor costs now.
We have the energy supplies, we have robotics, artificial intelligence, and you write that helps push us ahead in manufacturing, but I thought that was pushing us behind in manufacturing, creating jobs in manufacturing because you needed fewer human beings to do that.
Well, in that sense, that's true, but the advantage is those jobs right now are over in China. So can you imagine what happens here with, for instance, I just got a crown put on a tooth, and I asked my dentist just jokingly, where does this thing come from? I mean, it's not going to China because they make a mold. And he said, no. He said, it's made in the United States. But he said, they use ceramic and zirconium, and we use a 3D printer to make that. And they were making those in China, and they're gold and ceramic, but they're made by hand. So can you imagine, those are jobs that we had actually farmed out to China, and now they're here in the United States.
21 before the hour on First Light. We're talking with economic development specialist Greg Kozera. Is this something that it's up to business to do? Is it up to consumers to put pressure on business? Is it up to the government to put pressure on business? And you know, how do we do that? Because, you know, if you're in business, your bottom line is what you're in business to protect.
You know, you hit it on the head. It's all three. One is business needs to look at it, because what I tell businesses is look at what's being made in China, and can you make it here? And if you can, you're going to probably be able to make it cheaper, because here's what happens. The United States has the robotics, the advanced manufacturing. We've got the feedstock and the cheap energy, but the market's here. So right now what's happening, Michael, is what we've got, the Chinese are making this stuff, and they're getting their energy either from us or Russia or Iran, like OPEC countries, and then they're sending it here. But if you make it here, and particularly where I live in Shale Crescent, USA, Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, this is the cheapest place in the world to make stuff, because your feedstock and your energy is literally under the plant. So it's right here. And then once you make that thing, the market's here. So whether it's a mask or a toothbrush, we can make it here, and we can make it cheaper. And now in this pandemic, what the government can do is maybe encourage that with maybe some loans or some sort of tax incentive to get people to do that. Because what we do at Shale Crescent is let the world know that this is the place. And I think this thing changed so fast, Michael. I don't think most people realize that. I know they don't understand that labor advantage. That really surprises a lot of folks.
Well, I was going to ask about that because, I mean, the general impression most people would have is that if you want to make things, you can do it, you know, cheaper in other countries because they don't pay their workers as much. They don't have to pay them health insurance. They don't have to take care of all that, all those expenses that we have here. And yet you're telling me that we can actually do it cheaper here. But I'm hearing it's about science and technological advances, so I'm still not quite getting the connection. And excuse me for saying that. I know it's me, not you, but I don't quite get the link that we can still do it cheaper.
Well, for instance, that ceramic tooth that I've got, or cap that I've got in my mouth now, it was made in China. Now it's made here because of a 3D printer that we can do that. So those are real live manufacturing jobs, and those aren't your grandfather's manufacturing jobs. Those are modern jobs. They're high-tech jobs. They're high-wage jobs. So that's where that change comes from. The reason we have an advantage is we've got cheap energy, and with advanced manufacturing, that's a one-time cost that once it's sunk, now the advantage from our labor standpoint is in our favor.
Okay, I'm starting to get it now. Are some of the traditional things that we think of in this regard, like the steel industry or car parts or cars and things like that, do they also fit into this?
They do. And we're seeing that in all those industries because, you think about your car, it's not even metal anymore. It's mostly plastic. I mean, 70% of a car has got some sort of plastic or petrochemicals in it. And those kinds of parts and those kind of, they lend themselves to this advanced manufacturing. So I think that's huge. And I think the big thing for Americans is we've got to start to fill those needs. We've got to start to have our young people train for these jobs. But the other thing that you brought up is huge, too, is as Americans, I refuse today, I will not buy a mask made in China. I just won't. What we need to do as Americans is complain. It's like, if you're buying something from a big box store, where's that U.S. component? Because what we're finding, I was looking at light bulbs. Can you imagine a light bulb? Most of the stuff that from American companies that we think are American are made somewhere overseas. You can buy some no-name light bulbs that are made in Cleveland. They're cheaper and they're made in the USA. But even a toothbrush, we did some research at Shell Crescent that you can make that toothbrush 22% cheaper here in Asia. And there's a company here in our region that makes the fibers, the bristles for that brush. And I asked the plant manager, I said, where do those bristles go after you make them? And he said, well, actually, he said, Greg, there's a company in China that buys these things from us. So we're selling there. Can you imagine this, Michael? We make the bristles out of using our energy and, and our feedstock. They go to China. China puts a handle to them and sends them right back here to us. The doggone American company can surely make that handle, wouldn't you think?
Well, you are the expert on that, my friend. Okay, it is 16 before the hour now. We're going to pause this conversation, take a break, check news, headlines, sports, and weather, and then we're coming back to our conversation with Economic Development Specialist Greg Kozera. It's all about jobs. It's all ahead on First Light. First Light headlines now at 14 before the hour. A suburban Atlanta school district has temporarily closed in-person instruction at the second of its 6 high schools. Cherokee County says an increasing number of COVID-19 cases is forcing large numbers of students and teachers into quarantine. Statewide, Georgia's 7-day average in deaths hit another new record. Nationally, the United States reported its highest number of deaths from the virus in a single day yesterday since mid-May, nearly 1,500. Joe Biden raised $26 million for his presidential campaign in the 24 hours after announcing California Senator Kamala Harris as his running mate. Democrats are now close to matching the massive $300 million cash stockpile that President Trump and the Republicans reported back in July. Americans counting on emergency coronavirus aid from Washington may have to wait until fall. Talks over a new aid package have all but ended. The White House and Congress are far apart on the size, the scope, and the approach on relief for households, schools, and a national strategy to contain the virus. First Light headline news.
Thursday sports, NHL playoffs. Bruins clip the Canes in double OT. Isles and Flyers win in the East. Avalanche and Canucks out West. Baseball, Cubs and A's win to lead their leagues. Yankees, Mets, and D-backs go big. Marlins survive 7 Blue Jay bombs to win in 10. Dodgers blank the Dads. Twins win along with the Rays, Royals, and Rangers, plus the White Sox, Orioles, and Astros. NBA, Clippers lock up the 2nd seed in the West. And MLS regular season resumes. Nashville nips Dallas for its first win ever. I'm Robert Workman.
Thank you, Robert. Let's find out now what's happening outside or on the country today with AccuWeather meteorologist Carl Babinski.
Today in Philadelphia, it will be rather cloudy and humid. Yesterday, there were some very strong storms. Today, I'm more concerned about heavy rain causing flooding than I am winds that could cause damage, but highs will be in the low 80s, so the recent heat wave has come to an end. Well, the same applies to Baltimore. Highs today around 84. Be on the lookout for a heavy thunderstorm that could produce rainfall that will aggravate flooding that occurred yesterday. Baltimore, for example, had around 3 inches Wednesday afternoon and early Wednesday night. Now, elsewhere in the country, Chicago, a dry day, the high near 84. It should be pretty nice. Same applies to Detroit, the high 82. In the Deep South, Atlanta will be near 90 with some sunshine. Houston, rather hot, the high 97.
Thank you so much, Carl. Well, it is 11 minutes before the hour here on First Light. So back to our conversation with Economic Development Specialist Greg Kozera, who works with the nonprofit Shale Crescent USA, trying to create jobs in what he calls the Rust Belt of America. Now, Greg, you were telling us earlier how under the right circumstances we can stop buying half our goods from overseas. The products could be produced more cost effectively here, and of course that's a big boost for jobs, right?
I think the people that will get it first are going to be these small to medium-sized, particularly the small companies, because they can do this very quickly, and they're really the innovators when you think about it. The big boys are kind of risk-averse, so they'll follow their leads.
When this pandemic started and all of a sudden within about 2 days you couldn't find anything to clean your hands with, all of a sudden you had distilleries making the hand sanitizers.
Yes.
Within days, all these kind of generic-looking products showed up that weren't around before because you had people saying, there's a need. We've got things that we can redo. We've got process here that we can change things. We've got some of the raw materials. Let's do that. I found that amazing and heartwarming to see that, actually, because first of all, a need was being filled, a very important need was being filled, and also, you like to see that American ingenuity is still out there. But what about these companies that still make the iPhones in China or make the clothing in poor countries? Are they just not understanding something here that they could do it here?
I think part of that's the case, and I think part of that is now going to have to be us as Americans that we can demand some of that change. A good friend of mine has got a couple plants here in West Virginia, and I was concerned how he was doing through this whole thing. He said, Greg, I'm busier than I've ever been in my career. And I'm thinking, wow, how'd you do that? And he said, we pivoted. They were making like switch box housings. And he said, we're making ventilator parts. So here's the message for American manufacturers. Is the small and medium companies, this is right in their wheelhouse, Michael, because they can pivot very quickly. A large company has to go through the board of directors, and sometimes it's really hard for them to change. But this guy literally overnight looked at it and said, nobody's going to be buying these switch boxes, but I can make ventilator parts. That's our ability, is we can pivot, and I think whether you're talking about clothing, I think we can do the same thing. Probably the big boys aren't going to do that, but those small and medium-sized companies, I think we'll be surprised how quickly some of this stuff can happen. And, what's really important for your listeners across the country is our manufacturing job here in the U.S. creates 8 other jobs.
How do we get these people to know and believe what you have to tell them?
People like you, shows like this are so important because this happened really so fast. The world has changed. Right now, Asia does not have a labor advantage. They were still stuck in that old paradigm that, it's cheaper to manufacture overseas. And it's not. It's not cheaper to manufacture over there. We have an energy advantage that they wish they had. And advanced manufacturing gives us that labor advantage.
What do you want people to do?
Our goal is to bring jobs back to this region, the old Rust Belt. And as a nonprofit, we got, if you go to Shale Crescent USA, go to our website, there's 3 different studies on there. That information, that's hard data that manufacturers can use to understand, their advantage. And then from that point, what they can do is look at what they can make. Now we need some help maybe from the big box stores on Think American now, because what you're going to find is if you make it here and if you sell it here, you've got a cost advantage. And I think if you're a big box store, to be plastering American, made in America on your product should be a great deal and a great advertising.
Greg, it's been a fascinating conversation, interesting material. Folks, you can get more information at shalecrescentusa.com. Our guest is Greg Kozera, who is an economic development specialist. Thanks so much for being with us this morning, Greg.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate everything you do because getting messages out to the American people, I don't think there's anything more important in today's world.
Thanks, Greg. We're back 24 minutes before